In China, there was an emperor. The story I want to share with you happened a long time ago, so it's good to hear it now before it's forgotten. The emperor's palace was the most beautiful in the world. It was made of a special kind of shiny clay called porcelain. It was costly but fragile, so you had to be very careful around it. In the garden, there were some unique flowers with pretty silver bells tied to them. The bells made a tinkling sound that caught the attention of anyone passing by. In fact, everything in the emperor's garden was special. The garden was so big that even the gardener didn't know where it ended. People who went beyond the garden knew there was a big forest with tall trees that sloped down to the deep blue sea. Large ships sailed under the shadow of those trees. In one of these trees, there was a bird called a nightingale. It sang so beautifully that even the poor fishermen, who had a lot of work to do, would stop and listen. Sometimes, when they went out at night to put out their fishing nets, they would hear the bird's song and say, "Oh, that's so lovely." But when they went back to their fishing, they forgot about the bird until the next night when they heard it again and exclaimed, "Oh, the nightingale's song is so beautiful." People from all around the world came to the emperor's city, and they liked it a lot. They also admired the palace and gardens. But when they heard the nightingale's song, they all agreed that it was the best thing of all. When they returned home, they told others what they had seen, and educated people wrote books describing the city, the palace, and the gardens. But they didn't forget the nightingale. It was really the most amazing thing. The books traveled all over the world, and some reached the emperor. He sat in his golden chair and read them, nodding in approval as he read about his city, palace, and gardens. However, when he read the words, "The nightingale is the most beautiful of all," he said, "What's this? I don't know anything about a nightingale. Does such a bird live in my empire or even in my garden? I've never heard of it. It seems I can learn something from books." Then, the emperor called one of his fancy-dressed helpers, who thought he was very important. When someone of lower rank spoke to him or asked him a question, he'd just say, "Pooh," which means nothing. The emperor said, "There's a really amazing bird in this book called a nightingale. They say it's the best thing in my big kingdom. Why hasn't anyone told me about it?" The helper said, "I've never heard of it. It hasn't come to the palace." The emperor said, "I want to see her tonight. The whole world seems to know more about my treasures than I do." The helper said, "I've never heard of her, but I'll try to find her." But where could they find the nightingale? The helper looked all around the palace, but no one he asked had heard of the bird. He went back to the emperor and said maybe it was just a made-up story in the book. He told the emperor, "Your Highness, you can't always trust what's written in books. Sometimes they're just stories or nonsense." The emperor said, "But this book came from the mighty emperor of Japan, so it must be true. I want to hear the nightingale. She must be here tonight." I like her a lot. If she doesn't come, we'll make everyone in the court jump around after dinner." The helper said, "All right," and hurried around the palace again, and lots of people followed him because they didn't want to jump around. Everyone was looking for the amazing nightingale that the whole world knew about, but the palace didn't. Finally, they found a kind girl working in the kitchen. She said, "Oh, I know the nightingale very well. She can sing beautifully. Every evening, I'm allowed to take leftover food to my sick mother who lives by the sea. On my way back, I get tired and rest in the woods, listening to the nightingale's song. It makes me cry, and it feels like my mother is kissing me." The helper guy said, "Hey, I'll give you a job in the kitchen, and you can watch the emperor eat if you show us where the nightingale is. She's supposed to come to the palace tonight." So, the girl led them to the woods where the nightingale sang, and lots of people from the palace followed her. As they walked, a cow started mooing. One of the people from the palace said, "Oh, there she is. What an amazing voice for such a small creature. I've heard it before." But the girl said, "No, that's just a cow. We're still far away." Then some frogs in the marsh began to make noise. Someone else said, "Wow, that's beautiful. It sounds like little church bells." But the girl said, "No, those are frogs. But I think we'll hear the nightingale soon." And a bit later, the nightingale started singing. "Listen, listen. There she is," said the girl. "And there she sits." She pointed to a little gray bird perched on a branch. The helper said, "Really? I never thought it would be such a small and simple thing. She must be a bit nervous with all these important people around." "Little Nightingale," the girl called out loudly, "our kind emperor wants you to sing for him." The nightingale said, "I'd love to." And she started singing beautifully. "It's like tiny, tinkling glass bells," the helper guy said. "And look at her throat moving. It's amazing, we've never heard this before. She'll be a big hit at the palace." The nightingale asked, "Should I sing again for the emperor?" The helper said, "You're invited to a party at the palace tonight, where everyone will love your wonderful singing." The palace was decorated really nicely for the occasion. The walls and floors were shiny and covered in 1,000 lights. Pretty flowers with little bells tied to them were placed in the hallways. Because of all the people moving around and the wind, the bells rang loudly, and it was hard to hear anyone talking. In the middle of the big hall, they put a golden perch for the nightingale to sit on. Everyone from the palace was there, and the kitchen girl got to stand by the door, even though she wasn't a real cook for the palace. Everyone was dressed up, and they all looked at the little gray bird when the emperor signaled her to start. The nightingale sang so sweetly that the emperor got teary-eyed, and then tears ran down his cheeks as her song became even more touching and touched everyone's hearts. The emperor was so happy that he offered the nightingale his golden slipper to wear around her neck, but she said thank you and didn't take it. She said, seeing tears in an emperor's eyes is the best reward. An emperor's tears are very special, and it's an honor for me. Then she sang even more beautifully than before. That singing is so nice, the ladies at the palace told each other. They even tried to make gurgling sounds like the nightingale when they spoke, so they could feel like nightingales too. Even the servants and helpers at the palace said they liked it, and they're usually hard to please. The nightingale's visit was a big success. She was going to stay at the palace and have her own cage. She could go out twice a day and once at night, but she had to wear a little string tied to her leg, held by 12 servants. Flying like that wasn't much fun. Everyone in the city was talking about the amazing bird. When two people met, one would say Nightin and the other would say Gale, and they knew what they meant. Nobody was talking about anything else. 11 kids were even named after the nightingale, but they couldn't sing a note. One day, the emperor got a big package with "The Nightingale" written on it. He thought it was a new book about the bird. But instead of a book, it was a fancy, jewel-covered bird that looked real, like a living one. When you wound it up, it could sing just like the real nightingale and move its tail up and down, which was all shiny with silver and gold. It had a ribbon around its neck that said, "The Emperor of China's nightingale is not as good as the Emperor of Japan's." Everyone who saw it said, "This is so beautiful." The person who brought the fancy bird was given the title of Imperial Nightingale Bringer-in-Chief. People at the palace thought they could sing together and make a great duet, but the real nightingale sang in its own natural way, and the fancy bird only sang waltzes. "That's not a problem," the music teacher said. "It's perfect to my taste." So, the fancy bird had to sing on its own, and it did just as well as the real one. It was also much prettier to look at because it sparkled like jewelry. It sang the same songs 33 times without getting tired. People would have loved to hear it more, but the emperor said the real nightingale should sing something. But where was she? No one noticed when she flew out the open window back to her forest. "What strange behavior," said the emperor when they realized the real nightingale had flown away. The court people blamed her and said she was ungrateful. "But we have the best bird, anyway," one person said. They made the fancy bird sing again, even though it was the 34th time they'd heard the same song, and they still hadn't learned it because it was quite tricky. The music teacher praised the bird a lot. He even said it was better than a real nightingale, not just because of its fancy looks with diamonds, but also because it was easier to understand. He said, "You see, dear Emperor, with a real nightingale, you never know what it's going to sing. But with this bird, everything is known. You can open it up and explain how the music works, why one note follows another." "Exactly what we think," they all agreed. So, the music teacher got permission to show the bird to the people the next Sunday, and the emperor told them to be there and listen. When they heard it, they were like people who had drunk too much tea. which is a Chinese thing to do. They all said, "Oh," and held up their fingers and nodded. But a poor fisherman who had heard the real Nightingale said, "It sounds nice, and all the tunes are the same. But there's something missing, I can't quite tell what." After this, the real Nightingale was sent away from the empire, and the fancy bird was put on a soft pillow near the emperor's bed. There were gifts of gold and precious stones around it, and it was given the title of Little Imperial Toilet Singer and was considered the most important on the left side because the emperor thought the left side, where the heart is the most important. The emperor's heart is in the same place as everyone else's. The music teacher wrote a 25-volume book about the fancy bird, filled with very hard Chinese words. But people said they had read it and understood it because they didn't want to seem foolish and get trampled on. So a year went by, and the emperor, the court, and all the other people in China knew every little bit of the fancy bird's song. That's why they liked it more. They could sing along with it, and they often did. Even the kids on the street sang, "Zzz, cluck, cluck, cluck," and the emperor himself could sing it. It was quite funny. One evening, when the fancy bird was singing its best and the emperor was in bed, something inside the bird went whiz. Then a spring broke, and all the gears started spinning around with a whir-r-r sound, and the music stopped. The emperor jumped out of bed and called for his doctor, but there wasn't much the doctor could do. So they called a watchmaker, who talked and checked the bird for a long time. They managed to fix it a little, but they said it had to be very carefully used because the inside parts were old and replacing them would hurt the music. This made everyone very sad because the bird could only be played once a year, and even that was risky for the inside parts. The music teacher gave a speech with difficult words, saying the bird was just as good as before, and no one disagreed with him. 5 years passed, and then a real sadness came to the land. The Chinese people really liked their emperor, but now he was very sick and might not make it. They had already picked a new emperor. People in the street asked the lord-in-waiting about the old emperor, but he just said, "Pooh," and shook his head. The emperor lay in his fancy bed, very pale and cold. The court thought he was gone, and everyone hurried to honor the new emperor. The chamberlains talked about the situation, and the maids invited guests for coffee. They put down cloth in the halls and corridors so that no footsteps could be heard, and everything was quiet and still. But the emperor was still alive, although he was pale and stiff in his beautiful bed with long curtains and golden tassels. A window was open, and the moonlight shone on the emperor and the fancy bird. The poor emperor felt a strange weight on his chest, and he opened his eyes. He saw Death sitting there, wearing the emperor's golden crown and holding the emperor's sword and banner. Around the bed, there were lots of strange heads, some ugly and some kind-looking. These were the emperor's good and bad deeds, reminding him of things that made him sweat. Do you remember this? Do you remember that? They asked one by one, making him remember things he'd rather forget. I don't know, the emperor said. Music. Music, he cried, get the big Chinese drums so I don't have to hear them. But they kept going, and Death nodded like a Chinese person to everything they said. Music! Music! The emperor shouted. You, precious golden bird, please sing. I've given you gold and precious gifts. I even put my golden slipper around your neck. Sing. Sing. But the bird stayed quiet. There was no one to wind it up, so it couldn't sing a note. Death kept looking at the emperor with his cold eyes, and the room was very quiet. Suddenly, sweet music flowed in through the open window. The real Nightingale sat on a branch outside. She had heard about the emperor being sick, so she came to sing a song of hope and trust. As she sang, the room got brighter, the emperor's blood flowed faster, and he felt stronger. Even Death listened and said, "Go on, little Nightingale, go on." "Will you give me the beautiful golden sword, the rich banner, and the emperor's crown?" the bird asked. Death gave up all these things in exchange for the song, and the nightingale kept singing. She sang about a peaceful churchyard where white roses grew, and the scent of elder trees filled the air. The fresh grass was watered by the tears of mourners. Death wanted to go see this place, and he floated out through the window like a cold, white mist. "Thank you, you heavenly little bird. I know you well. I once banished you from my kingdom, but now you've chased away the scary faces from my bed and taken death from my heart with your beautiful song. How can I repay you?" "You've already rewarded me," the nightingale said. "I'll never forget the first time I made you cry with my song. Those are the best treasures for a singer's heart. Now, sleep and get well. I'll sing to you again." As she sang, the emperor fell into a peaceful sleep. When he woke up, the sun was shining through the window. None of his servants had come back. They all thought he was dead. Only the nightingale was still there, singing beside him. "You must stay with me always," the emperor said. "You can sing whenever you want. I'll break the fancy bird into 1,000 pieces." "No, don't do that," the nightingale replied. "The bird did its best while it could. Keep it here. I can't live in the palace or build a nest, but I'll come when I want. I'll sit on a branch outside your window in the evening and sing to make you happy and fill your thoughts with joy. I'll sing about happy and suffering people, about good and bad things happening around you. I fly far from your palace to the homes of fishermen and peasants. I love your heart more than your crown, even though there's something special about that too. I'll come, and I'll sing to you, but you have to promise me one thing." "Anything," said the emperor, dressed in his fancy robes, with the heavy golden sword against his heart. "I only ask one thing," she said. "Don't let anyone know that you have a little bird who tells you everything. It's better to keep it a secret." With that, the nightingale flew away. The servants came in to check on the dead emperor, But to their surprise, he was standing there and said, "Good morning."